Hey guys, Matthew. In today's video, we're going to be recapping day 2 of the Zero to Hero because a lot of things have changed, both in terms of our setup, in terms of our gear, and all of that. So there's a lot of answers to be answered. But before that, I do want to say one thing. A good friend of mine, Somayd, decided that he was also going to do a Zero to Hero, and without really knowing about me doing it, we decided to kind of start one at the same time, and then we were bantering between friends, and we decided that we were going to try to make it a contest to who would get to a headhunter first. So we're racing to a headhunter. So that's going to be pretty exciting. We're playing the exact same build because clearly he copied me. But jokes aside, he's actually going to be doing some different strategies. So I highly recommend you check out his videos as well. He's going to be doing some daily updates. So shout out to my boy Somayd. Let's get back to the actual video about how we went from yesterday's setup to today's setup, which is substantially more expensive, especially if we're looking at a percentage base. It's still a pretty cheap build. All in all, I've spent about maybe 2.5x on the entirety of the character, which is still very, very cheap. But of course, that's a far stretch from yesterday's build, which was like 50C total. All right, so let's talk about a couple things on the tree, and then we'll talk about the actual gearing. So remember what I said in yesterday's video, where you can get a 9 passive for much cheaper than 8 passive. So I actually was rolling these, and I got to the point where I had 8 unskilled passives or something on my skill tree, because I was waiting for my cluster jewel to be rolled, and I decided, you know what, I'm just going to go ahead and spend the currency instead. So I bought a 9 passive with 3 notables for a physical cluster, and instead of paying 3x, which I would have paid for an 8 passive, I bought this for 30C, and there was a bunch of them, right? So it's all about trying to maximize the value of your currency when you have none, essentially. And this was just great value because the other one had cost me 1C, but I wasn't able to roll it myself, and I wasn't going to invest. What I was doing is every time I came upon a harvest, I would throw it in and just reroll with whatever I found, any sort of reforges. But unfortunately, didn't get too lucky, so I had to spend 30C to get it. But I mean, it's 1 extra passive, but it saves me more than like 2.5x or something. It's crazy. Next, I bought my 2 mediums. I was able to pick one up for 30C, which was this one with Fire Res, and then this one with All Res and Dex I was able to pick up for 40C. So some pretty good deals there. These are pretty much average prices. There's a lot of people who get these clusters. They even drop with these mods all the time because these are very, very highly weighted mods, so they're not uncommon at all. Next, in terms of our jewels, I've just been live searching jewels with like life and single multi, and I'm just slapping those in every single socket that I have. So very, very cheap jewels. On average, I'm paying about 5C for these jewels, so very, very cheap stuff. And they work out quite well. Okay, now let's talk about the elephant in the room, which is the Carcass Jack, which has a +2 AoE corruption on it, because obviously that would scare a lot of people away, as in like, this is way too expensive, how am I ever going to do this? But the thing is, this league we have access to these things called tainted fusings and tainted jewelers, and this made getting this very, very easy. So a quick guide on essentially what I did is I bought a base with +2 AoE gem, which had the Crangle of Regen Life, which I don't really care about. It actually is pretty bad, but it was a well-rolled one, and it was also really cheap. It was 30 or 40 chaos, I don't quite remember, with just the +2 AoE. It had no sockets, and it wasn't linked or anything like that. But that's okay. So what I did is I bought that, and then I went to my bench.
Just need a moment to catch my
I
breath.
put this on the bench, which was corrupted, which means everything I do on the bench is also going to cost me some Valorbs. So I believe I bought like 70 Valorbs or something like that for like 35C. And then what I did is I did a 4 socket, which cost me 10 jewelers and 10 Valorbs. And then from there, what I did is I used the Tainted Jeweler's Orb in order to get to 5 sockets and then to 6 sockets. And if I ever went back down to 3 sockets from the 4, whenever I used the Tainted Jewelers, I would benchcraft back on 4 sockets because it's only 10 Valorbs and 10 Jewelers. And then I would go again for the 5th and the 6th with the Tainted Jewelers until I got 6 sockets. Now, in terms of the link, I did the exact same thing, but I played the system a little bit. What I did is I used the 2 linked sockets instead of the 4 linked sockets. Now, this is random, and maybe it's a bit of a gamble, but 4 link sockets will cost you 10 fusings and 10 Valorbs, but this is only 1 fusing and 1 Valorb. And the thing is, when you do 2 link sockets, it manipulates the 2 sockets at the top, which means that the 4 sockets at the bottom are left to themselves, which means they can actually link, right? It can give you a 2-socket link at the top and then a 4-socket link at the bottom. That's kind of what I was looking for, and as long as it took me less than 10 tries, it was cheaper to do it that way than to go with the 4 links. Obviously, though, it's not much cheaper, and it's a bit of a gamble, so it's up to you how you want to go about it. Now, once you get to the 4-link, 2-link, you are going to use a Tinted Orb of Fusing, which is a 50-50 to go to a 5-link, and then a 50-50 to a 6-link. And I bought 8 of these, if I remember correctly. And as you can see, I have 1 left, which means it took me 7. So I was pretty unlucky. But after 7 total fusings left, or maybe I bought 6 and it took me 5, but somewhere around there, I had a 6-link plus 2 AoE Carcass Jack, which is an incredible piece of gear. And the total cost of making this was probably less than a single Exalt. And the power that this thing gives me is absolutely insane. Now, one thing that you might see that's a bit different on the POB is that I have a Devouring Diadem. And the TLDR for a Devouring Diadem is that it's more damage and it's less tanky. So if you play my League Start version of this build, I did not put Devouring Diadem on it. And that is because what you are getting out of Devouring Diadem essentially is an extra aura, which is Herald of Purity, which sounds great. And on paper, it's great. It's 15% more damage or whatever. It's pretty good. It's about 12% more damage realistically, which is still pretty good, okay? But the downside of Devouring Diadem is that it's no longer an evasion base, which means you can no longer get the spell suppression if your boots, helmet, and gloves have evasion, and you can also no longer get spell suppression on your helmet, which is a great spot to get a lot of spell suppression. I think you get upwards of like 25 or something, as you can see. This is a T2 with up to 19, so maybe it's like 22. So you are losing about 30 plus spell suppression, which also equates to about 15% spell dodge by going with Devouring Diadem. So the question really is, do you want 15% more damage or 15% spell dodge, right? Because that's essentially what we're dealing with here. And what I did is I gave up the acrobatics for the spell dodge. I gave up the spell suppression. I gave up spell suppression there. I basically gave up spell suppression everywhere, and I gave up spell dodge everywhere, so my character is very, very squishy, which is why I would not recommend anybody really plays this version of the build. But in terms of getting as much damage per, chaos invested, per exalt invested, this is definitely going to be the way to go. And because it also gives you Eldritch Battery. Now, Exsanguinate costs life, so we don't care about Eldritch Battery, and Seismic Trap, one of the better links for it is Life Tap. This also costs life, so we don't really care about the Eldritch Battery, but it does mean that things like Smoke Mine, Flame Dash, or Curses, everything costs Energy Shield before mana, which means we can basically infinitely cast, which is a nice quality of life. For sure, it means that you're never going to be out of mana, and you can reserve the entirety of your mana pool, including, for example, War Banner down to like 30 mana, and still never have any issues with that. So that's a nice little advantage, but personally, I think that for the vast majority of people, going with my League Start version, which has a rare helmet with spell suppression, and then dropping War Banner and Herald of Purity for a little bit less damage, but way more survivability, is probably going to feel better for most people.
Just need a moment to catch
that's
my
pretty
breath.
much how we did that. Now, the question is how do we make the currency, right? How did I even make the 1 Exalt to make this Carcass Jack? How did I make the 15C to buy the Devouring Diadem and the 30C for the cluster and whatever? Well, pretty much just completed the Atlas. I killed all the Conquerors. As you can see, I have all of my Watchstones unlocked, and I'm on my way to Awakener 8, which I'm not going to be doing because my strategy ended, and I had everything required before I even hit Awakener 8. So I was able to just say, whatever, not going to have to do that. So the strategy was just to basically complete the Atlas in order to get levels. As you can see, I'm level 89, and this is basically just fine. I could go all the way up to 90, but because I have enough damage and because my setup is completed, I don't really care about leveling anymore. But essentially, whenever you kill Conquerors, there's this div card that is not guaranteed, but it seems to be very common. Dementophobia. And Dementophobia sells for about 20C, and I'd say it's maybe like a 50% drop rate when killing Conquerors to get this. I got like, well, maybe not a 50%, maybe like a 30%. I don't know, but it seems to be pretty common. And yesterday through the day, I probably dropped like 4 or 5 of these, which was about 100 chaos, which paid for all of my clusters, all of my, the vast majority of my gear. And then another bit of currency what came from Ominous Arrival here. Ominous Arrival gives you Harbingers, and I spent some time in Valdo's Rest, and then I would get some Exalt Shards. Now, this is not a common occurrence. I would say that since the beginning of this character, I probably got 4, so not great. But 4 was still, like, that's still like 40C or something, right? 35C. So that amounted to a decent amount. And then, of course, regular drops. I was making sure that at the end of every single map, because transmutes drop in bulk now, right? So it's pretty much impossible to run out of wisdom scrolls. I was making sure that I would fill up my inventory with rare items, right? At the end of the map, whenever I killed the bosses and there were a bunch of rares sticking out on the ground, I would pick up a bunch of them, I would ID them, and I would vendor them for alterations. This was for two things. First off, I needed alterations to roll my flasks, but the second is that alterations have gone up in price. They're like 1 to 5 now. So you could easily come out with about 1 to 2C worth of alterations every single map that you end up filling up your inventories, especially if you're picking up small things like amulets, rings, belts. Now, these are not things I would recommend in order to get rich, but they are the things that I did, like tiny little tips and tricks that I did in order to get to the point where I was able to afford all of my gear. Now, at this point where I'm at right now, what I did essentially after I got to this endgame status is I took 80C, which is what I had left, and I bought 4 Guardian maps. I bought Shaper Guardian maps in order to get basically my first Uncharted Realm nodes, which was going to be Remnant of the Past, and then I mapped for a little bit until I dropped a couple more Guardian maps from this, which allowed me to essentially run 2 Shaper sets, which I sold the fragments from. For roughly half an X each is what they're going for, about 75C. And the cool thing right now is that if I was to show you guys, now you'll see basically what the strategy is going forward. These Shaper sets, these fragments are very cheap. And the maps are also quite cheap. Now, the fragments are about 10C each. The maps are about, if you buy them in bulk, are about 15C each. So you're losing a little bit of money, but if you have Guardian's Aid, 50% of the time you're going to get 2 fragments, which means essentially the fragments pay for the maps by themselves, and then everything else is profit. The problem is there's not much else left, but if you have these 3 nodes, you're going to get a lot of bases, and a lot of those are rings. So I have a dump tab here for 10C, and a lot of the time I get rings like 2 stone rings or like amulets and stuff, and the bases themselves sell for about 10C, which is not great, but again, it's all about these little things that add up. And then I got also Gaze into the Abyss for the sake of farming Shaper. As you can see, I have 10 plus Shaper sets here. I might run them, I might sell them, I'm not sure yet, but the idea is very simple. You buy maps in bulk, the Guardian maps, right? Buy the Guardian maps in bulk. So I bought like 46 of these maps yesterday. I have just a few left. I'm probably going to be investing all of my money today into buying maybe a few hundred of these maps. And I can run these maps extremely quickly because of a secret tech that I'll talk about in a second. So what I do is I run a set of one of each of these maps with Maven on it. I don't identify them because this build can run literally everything in the game. So I don't even identify them. I don't scour them. I don't quality them. I just leave them to how I buy them so that I have to invest the least amount of time and currency onto them. And then I run the map. I run 4 of them. And then about 80% of the time after I've run 4 of them, I'll drop an invitation, which is the formed. 80% of the time I sustain. The other 20% of the time I have to go out and buy one of these. And then I roll those to about 70% quantity. And then I do the invitation, and then I rinse and repeat. The invitation drops me additional Shaper fragments, which is nice. But it also gives me Maven's Writs fragments. As you can see, I have 4 Maven Writs here, and these in bulk sell for about 0.8 Exalt each, and they are on the rise. So one thing that I did to unlock more Uncharted Realm nodes is I actually did 1 Maven, and I got pretty lucky. I dropped the Maven's Orb, which allowed us to really kind of skyrocket our progression, because we were kind of struggling. Obviously, you're making profit every step of the way in these things that I'm telling you guys right now. But that 1 Maven that I did in order to unlock Gaze into the Abyss was really good. Now, the other one that I did is I did the Elder Guardian, because it's pretty much also a break-even. You're buying the maps for about 15C. The fragments are worth about 15C, and if you have Guardian's Aid, you're going to make, that extra bit of currency. The difference between the Shaper one and the Elder one is that the Elder one, you're pretty much just going for the fragments, and you're just going for the invitation. Meanwhile, the Shaper one, you also have Shaper as a viable option to farm for currency, because right now, like I said, a Shaper set's about 40C, and if you sell the fragments in bulk, the Uber Elder fragments from Shaper, which is guaranteed, it's about 80 plus chaos, which means you're essentially doubling your money, or just about doubling your money, every single time. Now, it's not great profit, and Shaper is a really, really boring farm, but with this tech that I'm about to show you guys, it makes it quite a bit easier.
Just need a
here
moment
comes
to
the
catch my
super
breath.
secret tech. Bright Beak and 3 green socket prismatic eclipse with leap slam and faster attacks allows you to absolutely blast. So what I did essentially is I do this and I just leap slam through the map. I actually don't clear the maps, the Shaper maps, and I don't clear, I don't worry about anything. I just run straight to the boss, and when I say run, I mean slam. I slam my way straight to the boss, I kill the boss, and I rinse and repeat. And the goal here is just maps per hour. Bosses per hour. It's about going through it there as fast as possible, getting it done, and then moving on to the next one. I have my cast when damage portal in my gloves, so if I do die while I'm leap slamming, which is, fairly common, probably once every 2 to 3 map, I'll die while leap slamming. I just go right back in, and I get myself to the end of the map, kill the boss, rinse and repeat. And that's pretty much how I've done it, and this is also great for Shaper, because Shaper, you have to go through all of the 4 little thingies, the branches, to kill the side bosses, and the thing is, they're really, really far. And on a build that's like a miner or like a trapper, you don't walk around too quickly, and you have very limited movement ability, but you just press X, you go to your Bright Beak with your prismatic eclipse, and all of a sudden you're running Shaper in like 3 to 4 minutes per run. And every time you run a Shaper, remember, you're making about 40 chaos profit. So right now it's about 3.5 Shapers, and you make an Exalt, and you're running them in about 4 minutes-ish per Shaper. So we're looking at about a 4x per hour strategy just off of the fragments themselves. And if you're running Gaze into the Abyss, you're also going to be getting additional Shaper items, which could be, rings, amulets, but it could also be really good bases that are Atlas specific. I believe you could drop a bone helmet, you could drop a crystal belt, you could drop a titanium spirit shield, right? You could drop all these really good bases that could be worth, anywhere between 20, 30, 40 C to like multiple exalts on the very, very high end. If you get super lucky, you get like a Shaper opal ring, for example, could be really, really expensive. So that's pretty much the strategy. So we're basically going to be doing that all the way up to 50x. So tomorrow's video is probably just going to be highlighting the good drops that we got from today, because today we're going to be farming probably hundreds of these maps. And then I'll decide if I go ahead and farm the Shaper or if I go ahead and just sell off the sets, because they sell in bulk as well. And when you sell them in bulk, you're always going to get more value for your time and for your sets, right? So that's pretty big. Otherwise, nothing crazy. Of course, the invitations do drop other things such as Watchstones and Orb of Unmakings. Orb of Unmakings are pretty pricey. They're about 14C each, but you can sell them pretty easily for about 15C. So that covers, pretty much the price of an entire map, really. And you're getting 1 to 2 of these every invitation, which means that 1/4 to half of your actual price every single time in terms of map price is covered by just these. And then Watchstones, most of them are really bad, but some of them are worth anywhere between 20 to 50C, which is a pretty decent price. And then if you roll one that already has a good roll on it, be it quantity or effective Watchstones or any of the ones that people care about in the regions people care about them, they can go for multiple exalts. Now, that's like some jackpot, and it doesn't happen very often, but it can happen. And when it does, it's a nice little thing. And then otherwise, the best item I've had since the start of the series was an ID. So I identified this: T1 Strength, T1 Quant, T1 Energy Shield, and T3 Wed. Now this is a very niche amulet, but if anybody is magic finding on a attack-based ES character, this is one of the best amulets they can get. It also has a ton of strength, which people who are ES typically are going to struggle getting enough strength on their build. So this is a pretty sick find. And just, one thing that I just picked up off of one of the Guardians or Shaper, I don't even know. I identified it, and there you have it. Boom, multiple exalts. Now, again, this is not something that happens often, but it can happen. But yeah, that's pretty much it for what I've been doing so far in terms of my Zero to Hero. Again, for now, today, we're just going to be blasting some maps, so nothing special there. Now, before I go, as always, I do want to say a huge thank you to my supporters. So we have Kat, Stan, Brandon, Tim, Scott, Axel, Thomas, Reese, Rascoril, The Great Master, Mercury, Nake, Max, Alex, Johnny, Wolverine, Hamad, welcome back, and Georgie, as well as Nailed, Alex, Kevin, the other Alex, and Bidzen, anybody else who supported me in the past, and anybody else who wishes to remain anonymous. Hopefully you guys are learning stuff from this series, and otherwise I'll catch you guys in the next episode. Peace.